Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this online Fire Safety Essentials presentation. My name is Raj, and together with my co-host, Jim. Say hi, Jim.
Hello, everybody. I think I've welcomed myself already.
Oh, fantastic. So, look, our aim today is to empower you with fire safety essentials to keep you safe during times of fire. Now, some of you may already know me. I've already done a fair bit of work in the Peterborough area. Did a fair bit of work with Kathy Marsh, and I'm hoping Kathy will be joining us this evening to view this presentation. One thing that's totally true to say of Peterborough is that you have a fantastic community vibe going on there. You're very much into community safety and survival, risk management, and the preservation of life is our primary focus through Fire Safety Essentials. Now, this is an introductory session, so excuse us if some of the information may be a bit basic, but it's designed for those people that may not be too familiar with the basics when it comes to fire and fire behavior. A little bit about us. Both Jim and I are casual employees with the CFA and are passionate about delivering effective community education. I myself have been a volunteer with the Woodford Brigade, not too far from Peterborough, actually down the coast there, for almost 10 years or so, and loved every minute. What about you, Jim? What's your background?
I moved to Casterton about a year ago from Adelaide. I've been in the corporate sector for 20 years, training and educating people. So this, to me, was a logical fit to move, and I must say I really enjoyed moving away from corporate to community-based, and yeah, love it. Thanks,
Fantastic.
Raj.
Thank you, Jim. Now, as is traditional with all our presentations, and we've done a number of these across our region over the last couple of weeks, Acknowledgement of Country. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Eastern Maar group of Aboriginal peoples who are represented by the Eastern Maar Aboriginal Corporation, EMAC. Djab Wurrunga people, as the traditional custodians of the land on which we are hosting this meeting today, and of course pay our respects to the elders, their elders past, present and emerging, and of course any other Aboriginal people here today. I'd like to hand over to Jim now as we discuss some of the technology that we'll be using this evening to allow you to communicate with us and offer your opinions and comments. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Raj. So some of you might have used a webinar before. For some of you, it might be new technology, of course, with COVID. We've had to adapt to, the changing times, obviously. So one of the ways that you can communicate with us is through the chat function that you can see on your screen. There's a tab there. Now you can hear and see us, but we can't see and hear you. Now this presentation tonight is recorded, but the only part that's really recorded is Raj and myself and the actual information that we're presenting tonight. So to get everybody used to this technology, if you'd like to, you can click on the little tab there that says chat, and you'll see that opens a box up in the right-hand side of the screen. And just so that everybody's familiar with the technology, what I'll do is I'll ask a really basic question, where are you joining us from today? And if you would like to type in there, just so you know how to use the technology, into that box where it says type message here, then we'll be able to see that, and that's one way that you can communicate with us. So if you'd like to answer that question, there's no obligation to answer, of course, and anything that you provide to us tonight is anonymous, and we don't share it with anybody.
It's great to hear from Kathy. She's from Peterborough. Great to have you on board, Kathy. And of course, Marianne as well. A couple of people are watching from Merritt Street. That's Jamie and Sully. Welcome on board. Some folks from Lower Hectorsbury. So we've got quite a cross-section there, Jim. Julie from Peterborough.
Yeah, good. So that sort of gives you an idea of the technology of how you can communicate with us in terms of, using their chat function, which is great. And, we would really like you to engage with us. because we learn from you as well as you learning from us. Another way that you can communicate with us is through polls. So we're going to launch polls throughout the night, and it's just a series of questions. There's no obligation to answer it all, but, you know, it's great if we can both learn from each other as well. So I'm just quickly going to launch one here. And once we've launched the poll, you'll see it comes up onto your screen. And there's the poll there for you. So the first one is, how long have you lived in this area? You can click on your answer. Then you've got, have you been to a CFA meeting before? How did you find out about this session? Is question 3. And rate your knowledge around fire. So you can all have a go again at testing this technology and having a go at answering the questions. And at the end, we will collate all those results and we'll feed it back to you all so that you can see what everybody's thinking. It's just good to be able to communicate with people. So I hope you enjoy it from that perspective.
I think it might be a good idea also at this point, Jim, to let people know that, you know, there's no right or wrong answers in the polls. It's about learning, and we want everyone to make sure that we get the basic messages out there. We've currently got about 7 participating in our presentation this evening. Feel free to answer your comments. There's no right or wrong answer, and we're here to learn. So, Jim, back over to you.
Thanks, Raj. So I've just finished that poll, and I've shared all the collated results with you all. So if we looked at question 1, how long have you lived in the area? We can see that most people, or half the people, have lived there for 10 years, and the balance, it's under 10 years. Quite a lot that have lived there for 1 to 5 years. So there's quite a few new residents to the area. Have you been to a CFA meeting before? 50% yes, so 50% no, so half and half. How did you find out about this session? Social media and the Brigade was the majority. Some saw it on the notice board, newspaper advertisement. And how do you rate your knowledge around fire? 50% are low, 17% medium, and 33% high. So again, we've got a mixed bag. I'll stop sharing that now. So that's good. You know, we can tailor this presentation to a degree to the types of people that we have in attendance here today in such a beautiful part of the world. So what will you learn today? Well, this is what we're going to be talking about today. Understand what the local fire risks are. Every area is different and every area is unique. You know, your topography and vegetation is completely different to the Grampians. So each area has its unique risks. What to expect from fire? So we're going to go through the process of a fire and how it spreads. How do you know if there is a fire? Well, that sounds like a really silly question, doesn't it? But the quicker we know about the fire, the better choices that we can make. And that's what the next bullet is, planning and decision making. The quicker and the more knowledge we have about the fire, it alters our decisions. And sometimes we might have all the plans in the world, leaving early, whatever plan we have in place, but sometimes our plans fail and we get caught out. It's just plain and simple. You know, it happens. So how do you survive if your plans fail and you do get caught in a bushfire? We're going to talk about that tonight as well. So it's lovely to have you all in attendance. Now Raj is going to talk about understanding local fire risks. As we just said, each area is different. We've tailored this presentation tonight to your area. So I'll hand back over to Raj. Thanks, Raj.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Jim. So let's get into the nitty gritty. But before I do that, let me just add some context to this evening. So as Jim has clearly stated, this FSC or Fire Safety Essentials presentation is tailored for people living in the Peterborough area and the surrounds, okay? Now, we've specifically selected or targeted Peterborough because of its borderline high or very high borderline extreme fire risk. And we call that the VFRR, the Victorian Fire Risk Register. Peterborough is right up there when it comes to the degree of fire danger. Peterborough is located in the municipality of Moy. The town, at the 2016 census, Peterborough had a population of 247 across 333 private dwellings. So a relatively small population spread across 333 dwellings. Having done several fire presentations and activities in the area with the help of Kathy Marsh, as I mentioned earlier, I know that this area has a tremendous amount of community spirit. You want to do well for the community. And look, I think Stephen would be fully on board with that, with the hard work that they do with the brigade to keep the community safe 24/7. I know that we've done some community fire group work in the township as well, very well attended, very well supported. Peterborough is located on the Great Ocean Road, the world famous Great Ocean Road, 239 kilometres southwest of Melbourne, between Port Campbell, which is about 13 kilometres to the east, and Warrnambool, 52 kilometres to the west. The town is situated on the land to the west side of the mouth of the Curdies River. This is a beautiful part of Victoria with an abundance of major local attractions, including the world famous Great Ocean Road, as I mentioned earlier, the Bay of Martyrs, Worm Bay, the list goes on. Oh yes, and the James Irvine Monument, just to mention a few. One of the earliest British settlers in the area was Dr. David Curdy. In 1845, he followed Curdy's River, which incidentally is named after him, to its mouth. The estuary became known as Curdy's Inlet, and it was on the estuary that the village of Peterborough came into an existence. Dr. Curdy named it after his friend, Dr. Peter Reed of Richmond, Victoria. Just a bit of local context, local background. Both Jim and I have got fond memories of Peterborough. Jim used to holiday there as a child, as he mentioned earlier. I've done lots of community work. It's a beautiful part of the world, typical of a coastal location. What we must remember is that along with this natural beauty comes the ever-present threat of fire. Let's explore the Victorian landscape a bit further to make this a bit more evident to us. We have to acknowledge that fire has been present in the Australian continent for millions of years and has been significant in shaping much of the landscape. Many fires are started by lightning. Aboriginal people used fire for many thousands of years to care for country. The fires were a tool that encouraged the growth and extent of grasslands. The fires also served to enhance hunting, reduce levels of fuel, and we'll be talking about fuel reduction very shortly. Fire also helped to keep vegetation from becoming too dense and hard to walk through. Incidentally, bushfire record keeping only really started in earnest in about 1851. The slide that you're currently viewing shows a range of landscapes that we have throughout Victoria. We have all the usual suspects. There's grassland, there's bushland, there's mountainous forest areas, and of course, farmland. So let's consider the state of Victoria. Now, as you can see, this map shows the different weather districts across the state, and each weather district had its own level of fire risk. As you can see, the southwest in the bottom left-hand corner there, the fire risk is very much dependent on a number of factors, including the topography. And Jim mentioned that word previously. Topography is the lay of the land, the falls, the rises, the nooks and crannies, the valleys, even the estuaries to some extent. Another thing that we need to take into consideration is the seasonal outlook. The seasonal outlook describes the overall weather trend of what's happening in your weather district. The new spring outlook shows increased risk of grass fires. And let's not forget that Victoria is one of the most bushfire prone parts of the world. We often talk about California. Victoria is no different in the intensity and risk of fire. But we must remember that the risk throughout the state is very different. When we look at the seasonal outlook, the latest weather data shows parts of Victoria are forecast to have a wet spring. What does that mean? This is predicted to lead to continued strong grass growth or fuel load, and the potential of increased grass fire conditions once the vegetation dries out or cures. There is a high chance that these grass fires will move quickly and threaten properties and life. Needless to say, like every other season, there is a need to be prepared for fire that could happen due to this high fuel load. So preparation is something that we want to reinforce constantly throughout this presentation. New climate research by the CFA reveals that the number of high-risk bushfire days could triple in some parts of Victoria by the end of the century. I'd like to hand over back to Jim now as we talk about the local vegetation. I mean, when you look out of your window right now in Peterborough, how would you describe your vegetation? Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Raj. So now in the area, having holidayed there quite a lot, I see that the area has a lot of coastal scrub, and also, the surrounding area is predominantly farmland. So you could have, as Raj said, this season predicted to have a high fuel load in terms of grasslands in the paddocks and the fields around about Peterborough. So there's a couple of big risks there. The coastal scrub, where you'll have tea tree plants, which are high in oil content, so they will rapidly burn. And of course, the local grasslands, which would be dry, tinder dry in the middle of summer, and the grass fire will move very, very quickly. Now, you know what it's like when you're trying to build a fire in your own fireplace at home. You start with a piece of paper, then you put the kindling on, and then you add little bigger sticks, and then eventually, you put a log on. These fields are like little fields of kindling. The fire will move through that field, at a rapid speed, and they'll generate embers that'll carry far ahead of the fire front. Now, as well as that, we mentioned the topography as well, and it's a little bit hilly around Peterborough in the roundabout area. So
I think you're frozen, Jim. I'll pick up from what Jim is just about to say. I'm hoping you can still hear me. Basically, what we're saying is that for every 10% increase in the slope, a fire will double in speed. So let's not be feeling too safe when the smoke on the horizon and the fire seems a long way away, and there's hills that separate you and the fire. The fire could actually be at your location much faster than you may well think. So the topography, the lay of the land is increasingly important for the speed of the fire. The other major driver obviously is the wind. The wind will drive the direction of the fire. We often, and Stephen Beaton will contest to this, we often say that should there be a change in wind, and we always look out for a change in wind direction because that will alter the direction of the wind, of the fire. Jim, are you back with us to carry on?
I am. Sorry about that, everybody.
No worries.
I disappeared. So that's the local vegetation. I think Raj has completed that one. So what about local risks? So we've talked about vegetation. We talked about the coming season. What about local risks? I'll launch a poll here, and we'll have a look at what people believe to be the risk to be. Launching now.
So again,
there you go. You've got a multiple choice question. Yes.
Yes.
You can answer multiple choices to that question. You've got potential of grass speed, high fuel loads, narrow roads, high tourist area for summer, trees hanging over the excess roads, and numerous grass fires sparked by embers.
That's great, Jim. We've had all 7 participants answer the poll, so we can end that poll and share the results.
Okay, I'll share the poll with everybody.
Excellent.
There you go, everybody. Everybody thought high fuel loads were a consideration, and numerous grass fires sparked by embers, which is a real threat to your area. And I noticed one of the chats I mentioned tea tree before, when somebody put in their petrol bush, which is true. That's exactly how it operates. So it'll just burn. So they're the risks. I'll stop sharing there. Everybody can see the results. So, and again, you can see on this slide here some of the risks that you're confronted with in your area, and you've already identified them yourselves. Some of the other factors are the access points to Peterborough. Now, you've only got one road in, one road out, basically. Now, of course, in peak tourist time, you've got a lot of tourists there, potentially with their caravans. They slow the speed of people trying to exit the town as well, slow-moving vehicles to a large extent. So these are risks for you and for your families within your own community. And Raj and myself both do camp visits throughout summer when we have international tourists. It's very interesting to see that their lack of knowledge around fire risks. Now, of course, there's not going to be any international tourists much at the moment, but generally, you know, they will be a risk to your area because of their lack of knowledge. As well as that, you've got narrow roads and potentially, somebody mentioned trees falling over on the roads as well. So these are all risks to your safety. So now Raj is going to go into more detail to explain what resources are available in your town and what the risks are in terms of how the fire will progress in the coming slides. Thanks, Raj.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jim. Look, when we talk about brigade capacity, and this is a crucial factor when it comes to firefighting, we have to acknowledge that Stephen and the team and the crew at the Peterborough Brigade do a stellar job 24/7 looking after fire safety in your area and keeping everyone safe. But let's look realistically at the figures. We've already said that Peterborough has a population, as of the 2016 census, of about 247 individuals and spread across 333 properties. Now, they have at their disposal 2 tankers and 1 quick fill. The rhetorical question is here is, well, how realistic is it to expect a tanker and a crew at your property, at your home, at your farm, at your business on the event of a bad fire day? And I'd just like to leave that there. Absolutely, Kathy, very unrealistic. And the point that we're trying to make with this presentation is that community members need to take ownership of the situation, understand what they're up against. Fire, a force of Mother Nature that's unpredictable, can be devastatingly fatal. Why be there when fire arrives? Why put yourself and your families and your communities at risk when we know that the intensity of fire, particularly with coastal scrub, can be so very bad? And with the risk that you may well be trapped because of limited entry and exit from your location. What to expect from fire? Now, we all know that Victoria has always had a fair share of fire activity. 2 summers ago, we saw huge fires in multiple parts of the state. What Jim and I would like to do now is really get underneath the skin of fire and explore the elements that make fire such a damaging force. We're going to be looking at Ember Attack and also radiant heat as two key players in fire behavior. In grassland areas, there are a number of threats to your house and property. The first one is what we call direct flame impact. And the very easy and convenient way to understand this is that if you have fuel to your doorstep, you will have fire at your doorstep. So the idea there would be to try and break that continuity of fuel that links you to an advancing fire front and your property. Perhaps the development of a driveway, a gravel path maybe, or a veggie patch, anything that's going to stop the continuous flow or progression of that fire front towards your property. The second element is what we call Ember Attack, and I'm sure many of us would be aware of Ember Attack. However, I would like to play the following animation for you to give you a real graphic interpretation of what embers are all about. We make no apologies for the graphic nature of this presentation. It is designed to give you the reality of fire. For those of you that may feel somewhat sensitive to this content, please look away for about 3 minutes or so and then return thereafter. So I'm about to play Ember Attack for you. Here goes.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers, like large pieces of burning ribbon bark, hundreds of meters into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometers beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realise the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
Now, I've actually watched that presentation a number of times, and every time it gets me in the same way. It's graphic, it's real, and it gives you a real idea of the clear and present danger that fire is. With embers travelling so far ahead of the fire front. And these are the telltale markers of the fire and your imminent danger. There's no doubt that Ember Attack is the biggest cause of property loss during a fire. And some of the images that you're seeing on your screen give you some idea of the speed with which grass fires can move, the way that they leave the countryside scarred and barren and dry. I hope this in some way gives you an idea of how fire spreads and how we need to be vigilant about embers in the air. And of course, the CFA advocates for leaving early. It's always going to be your safest option. I'm going to hand over to Jim now, who's going to talk a bit more about radiant heat while I prepare the animation. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Raj. I think you might have to unmute me, though, for the attendees, because mine's saying there's a little... I had a message from Stephen. Thanks, Stephen, for letting me know that maybe they couldn't hear it.
Oh, no, that was the question from myself to Stephen to see if he wanted to be unmuted to say a few words on behalf of the brigade.
Yeah, no worries. That's fine then.
No problem.
Okay, so...
So we're going to spend some time talking about radiant heat, Jim.
Yeah, I haven't got the presentation on my screen though.
There you go.
There we go. Yeah, thanks, Raj. Okay, so radiant heat is the big killer of people. So Raj talked about Ember Attack and how that will destroy property. The biggest killer, though, for human life is radiant heat. Radiant heat will precede the fire. And we've got a very good presentation here, graphic presentation here for you to show you how dangerous radiant heat is. And the webinar video will show you the technical and the scientific part behind radiant heat. So maybe, Raj, if you play that clip.
Absolutely. So again,
thanks,
this
Raj.
presentation may well be somewhat alarming to some people, so feel free to look away for the 2.5 minutes of its duration. Radiant heat.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved natural fibre clothing like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defense against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
Once again, that same message, leaving early, that is always going to be your safest option. Jim?
Yes, thanks, Raj. So you can see there, radiant heat is a killer of people. And just in response to Kathy asked a question whether this webinar is available. Yes, it is, Kathy. We're just trying to work out the technicalities of how we can get it to the groups that do want to use it afterwards, and that's why it's recorded. As well as that, all the resources for this meeting will be available at the end. The end slide shows you links to all the resources you're able to get for this particular presentation. Now, in terms of radiant heat, you can see, for example, in these shots on the screen here at the moment, this house, for example, here, it hasn't been lapped by the fires, as you can clearly see when you look at those weatherboards. However, the paint is peeled off, just clearly because the radiant heat is so strong that it's melted the paint off the walls. And likewise with the signage there, you can see again the sign hasn't been lapped by flames. There's no black object on that particular sign, but the intense radiant heat has melted all the graphics on that sign. So this is why Raj was saying, don't put yourself in harm's way. The radiant heat will be a killer unless you have good protection. So the CFA, after catastrophic fires, quite frequently interview the people that have been through the event, and some of the comments that people make, it's clear what you see on the screen at the moment. Horrific experience. So again, you ask yourself, why would you put yourself in those circumstances? And the CFA advocate leave early, and for good reason when you read that what these people have been through. So I'll give you a minute just to read those ones. Sorry for the attendees. I think my internet's dropping in and out a bit. The joys of living in country, regional Victoria.
No, you're doing great, Jim. Absolutely brilliant.
In a small country town.
All right. I'm going to...
I'll hand back over to Raj now, because he's going to talk about now how we can protect ourselves and the resources we have to keep ourselves abreast of fire. Thanks, Raj.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jim. I'm going to do something that we don't normally do. There's another animation that I came across quite recently, and I just would like to share that right now because it's something that actually is quite powerful. When we talk about emotional intelligence and being on top of our game, I think this bit of animation, which is only very short, speaks volumes. It's called I'll Never Do That Again.
10 years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
You know, in future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
Very powerful. Leaving before the fire even got there. What I'd like to do now is continue with our presentation, because what does this all mean for us? What does it mean for the community of Peterborough? We've tried to peel back the layers of fire, and quite clearly you can see that it's a very stressful and traumatic environment in which you're placing yourselves. There is a desperate need to be prepared and planned. There's a high likelihood that your main exit routes may well be blocked by either fallen trees, abandoned vehicles, or other obstacles. You understand greatly now about Ember Attack and the way it spreads fire so quickly, several kilometers ahead of the fire front. And we've spoken also about radiant heat in graphic detail, killing you way before the flames actually arrive. All of these things will affect your ability to make good decisions. And what I'd like to do is get Jim to launch our next poll, what to expect from fire. And it asks the question, a multiple choice question about your ability to make good decisions, can be impacted by many factors. I'd like for you to tick the items that you think will affect your ability to make good decisions, knowing now what you know. We have to accept that fire is a dangerous environment. It's a dark environment. It's disorientating. It's noisy. It can be a toxic environment in terms of odors and fume. Fantastic. Thanks everyone for answering that poll. And this gives us some great intel. What we have to acknowledge here, and the words of the CFA Chief Officer, Jason Heffernan, also is that as human beings, we can only handle a certain amount of pressure. Some of us can handle pressure better than others, but the majority of us can find situations extremely stressful, especially when the situation is changing so rapidly around us. When things aren't going to plan, we don't like things to be out of order. And we certainly don't like it when we're running out of time. This all leads to communication breakdown. All of these are the key players when it comes to being on top of the fire situation. Do you really want to be in that situation? Let's move on to the next portion of this presentation, which looks at how do you know if there's a fire? Now, I'm going to open up the chat function and just tell me, what are your go-tos? If you were to try and find out if there was fire activity in your area, where would you go? Who would you talk to? Who would you listen to? What app would you go to? So the chat function is now open. Let me know what's your go-to for a fire. How's it going there, Jim? Have we had many responses to this question?
Yeah, they're all Victoria Emergency app and ABC radio. So two very, very good resources of information. People aren't relying on social media, which is good, Raj.
Excellent. Okay. Let's explore this a bit further. We're all familiar. I know that the community of Peterborough are familiar with the fire danger rating, the FDR. The main take-home message from this is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a severe, extreme, or a code red day for it to be a bad fire day. It can actually happen on the high or very high, provided the conditions are correct. Now, the fire danger rating can actually be seen sometimes on television, certainly on social media, but mostly on a sign on the approach to a town or township, sometimes near the CFA shed, but not always. Now let's just sort of dispel a few myths that exist around the FDR. What does the FDR actually mean? Let's launch for the next poll here, Jim, about asking our audience, what do they understand that the fire danger rating actually means? So what we'd like you to do, and there's no, have a go. We don't know who's answering what in the poll. And there's three parts to this particular poll. And the first one asks, well, what does the fire danger rating mean? Is it A, an indicator of how likely a fire will start? Or is it B, an indicator of how bad a fire would be if one were to start? The second question asks, well, do you know how many code red days have happened in the region in the last 5 years? And finally, does anyone know how many extreme days have happened in the region in the last 5 years? Wonderful. We've had 2 people answer so far, so a few more responses and then we'll close the poll and share the results. Have a go, even if you're unsure. Because we've got quite a mixed audience today with medium to high fire understanding. So we're all here to learn and grow in our fire behavior knowledge. So that's almost everyone. One more person to have a go. Okay, let's end that poll, Jim, and share the results. Fantastic. So as you can see from the findings of this really important poll, the correct answer for what the fire danger rating actually means is it's actually an indicator of how bad a fire would be if one were to start. So, you know, 83% of you got that right. So there's learnings there for the 1 person or 2 people that didn't get that right. So look, that's what it is. We've learned something fantastic. In terms of code red days, there have been no code red days in the area of Peterborough in the last 5 years. And in terms of extreme days, there have actually been 2 in the last 5 years. So some good learning there as well. I'm going to close that poll and we're going to explore some of the elements of this sliding scale that is the fire danger rating. Let's talk about severe. What does severe mean on the fire danger rating? On a severe day, we can expect hot, dry, and possibly windy conditions. If a fire starts on a severe day and takes hold, it may be uncontrollable, a maybe. Let's look at extreme. On an extreme day, expect extremely hot, dry, and windy conditions. These are typical of an extreme day. If a fire starts on an extreme day and takes hold, it will most definitely be uncontrollable. It'll also be unpredictable and fast moving. Spot fires, as we saw in one of the earlier animations, will start, they'll move quickly, and will come from many directions. Of course, the wind is a big player here. The wind is the driver for the fire. Code red, the very end of that sliding spectrum. These are the worst conditions possible for bush and grass fires. Our Australian homes are definitely not designed or constructed to withstand fire conditions of this type. The obvious place to be, or the safest place to be on a code red day, is to be away from the high risk bushfire area. What we'd like to do here is stress that we can use our understanding of the fire danger rating as trigger points. Use your understanding of severe, extreme, code red, the fire danger rating, to know when you're going to leave. What's your plan going to be? Where are you going to go? How are you going to get there? And what are your options if you can't leave at all? We always advocate that leaving a high-risk bushfire area the night before or early in the morning is your safest option. Don't wait and see. And the idea is to avoid forested areas, and there is a bit of plantation and forest in the Peterborough area. Avoid the thick bush and long dry grass, because they will be fuel sources and subject to possible ember attack. Today's world is a world of information overload. I call it infobesity. We are constantly being bombarded from many different directions, whether it's a chat with a neighbor over the fence, overhearing a conversation in the cafe, or a social media comment or post. These are all regarded as informal sources of information. Not everything that we hear or read is accurate, despite good intentions. If you're going to make decisions about your safety, about the safety of your family, the safety of your community, it's important to double check that the information that you've heard or read is correct. And this is why the CFA are strong advocates for formal sources of information. Real-time, evidence-based sources of information. We've already had reference to two of these already, the local news, ABC Radio 774, the Vic Emergency app. Let's just consider local news for 1 second. A formal source of information. In the event of a fire, the chances are that all communication lines will be lost. And the only way to keep contact or in touch with the outside world will be via a battery-operated radio tuned in to 774 ABC Emergency Radio. It will be your connection to the outside world from your dark, noisy, toxic, smoke-filled environment. It could be your lifeline out. It'll give you advice and information about the progress of fire fighting and fire exits and fire planning. The Vic Emergency app works in a very similar way. It's a game changer. It will allow you to monitor fire activity in your locality. It'll also allow you to spread the area of cover, the radius of cover on your app to far further afield. So it'll allow you to plan your escape route. Both Jim and I would suggest that you all seek to make sure that you have the Vic Emergency app on your mobile phone. Let's explore that just a bit further as we discuss the triage of the device warnings that appears through the Vic Emergency app. Color-coded, the first is advice. And by its very nature, advice, it is just that. It's a notification that activity in the area, there is some activity in the area, but it may have subsided and is no longer a threat. Just make sure that you're aware there could be something going on. The watch and act. As it suggests, watch and act. This could be part of your trigger scenario to leave and leave early. You've been watching and now's the time to act. An emergency has developed in your nearby area. You need to protect yourself, your family and others. The emergency warning. Double exclamation marks, emergency red for danger. You are in imminent danger and you need to take action immediately or you will be impacted. And we're not mincing our words here. This is clear language so that everyone understands it. It's important that you do not wait for a warning. Heed the warning signs, enact your written plan, your fire plan, your means of escape, and leave early. Two further elements of the triage system is the evacuation notice and also community information. An evacuation is recommended or procedures are in place to evacuate, and that's what the evacuation sign will indicate. Community information. This can be used as a notification that an incident has occurred and there is no longer a threat to the community. So it's information only. Do not wait for a warning. Do not subject yourself to that amount of undue pressure, stress. What I'd like to do now is hand over to Jim, who's going to work through a scenario with you that takes into consideration some of the applications that we've spoken about, particularly the Vic Emergency app and the time frame attached to that Vic Emergency app. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. So Raj just been through the triage of warnings that may appear on the Victoria Emergency app. The update to the Victoria Emergency app obviously takes time, and it may not be the same as what you're experiencing outside your window at that particular time. Now, why is this? Well, if we have a look at the timeline here on this slide, you can see on the far left-hand side a fire breaks out. Now, it doesn't become immediately noticed. Sometimes it might. Sometimes it's in an isolated location. So it takes time for that fire to be noticed, to get reported, for somebody to type it in, for somebody to put it onto the Victoria Emergency app. And, you know, as you can see from the timeline here, you know, it might not get reported into 000, we'll say after 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever the time frame might be. But it's not instantaneous. Now, of course, you can imagine on one of these extreme days, that fire is growing bigger and bigger at all times, isn't it? Once the information becomes evident, then, of course, it goes to an advice message on the Victoria Emergency app. So again, if you're looking at that timeline there, we'll say it's, you know, 15 minutes to the advice warning. Meanwhile, that fire's still burning. The CFA gets dispatched a vehicle to the site, and once it's all confirmed, then potentially it might go to a watch and act, or it might go to an emergency. So you're talking now probably at the 20, 25-minute mark. Now, of course, some of this is going to depend on how far away you are from the fire front as well. So if this fire broke out over your back fence, that's going to be on you instantaneously. If it's 20 kilometres away, then, you know, it's a different scenario. So this is what we're saying. What you might be experiencing might be slightly different to what you're seeing on the Victoria Emergency app because of the timeline it takes for the information to filter through. However, that is not the only thing that we can rely on as the Victoria Emergency app, and for that information technology to filter through to ABC radio or some other source of information source that we may be looking for. We can also keep ourselves alert. So on one of these extreme days or co-red days, it's not that we're going to pull the blinds down, turn the air conditioner on and just say, well, the fire will pass. We can't do that for our own safety. So how can we keep ourselves alert and not just totally rely on the technology to issue the warnings to us? Well, we can use our own common sense and use our own sensors. So if you have a look at your window and you saw smoke, wouldn't that be a warning that you need to go and investigate and find out what's going on? If you're at home and you're listening to sirens go past, emergency vehicle sirens go past your house, wouldn't that be a good sign to go and find out and investigate what's happening? And likewise, if you smell smoke, don't ignore the warning sign, because that's a sign that something's happening within your area. Even though at that particular point in time, it may not appear on the Victoria Emergency app. It will, but the time might be shortened and fire might be upon you before you notice it. So that's how we can keep ourselves abreast of the changing circumstance. Let's have a look at a possible scenario here. We've got a code red day, typical Wednesday, you're off to work. So you head off to work in one of your local towns, and on your way to work, you can see the branches, as you can see from the picture there on the screen, the branches on the side of the road, they're buffeting with strong wind. There's little twigs being blown off, there is leaves being strewn across the road. You can feel the heat through the car window. It's one of those extreme days that we all experience over summer. So you get to work, and at lunchtime, you hear some of your colleagues talking, and they tell you that there's been a fire breakout in the Peterborough area. So you jump on the Victoria Emergency app and you see it's not a it's in Peterborough and it's not a short distance from your home. So you decide to yourself, I think I'll go and investigate. I'll jump in my car and I'll head back to Peterborough and make sure everything's okay. However, on the way back to Peterborough, the police have set a roadblock. And they're only allowing emergency vehicles through. So you get to the roadblock and they say to you, no, sorry, you're going to have to turn around and go to another location. Too dangerous to enter, and we're only letting emergency vehicles in at this time. So that paints the scenario for you in this particular instance. What could we have done that would have been different so that we would have been prepared for these events? So now we're going to have a look at what you could have done different. And Raj is going to take you through scenario number 2. Thanks, Raj.
Thanks, Jim. I think before we do that, let's just finish your portion of the scenario off by asking, well, what does this actually mean for you? Here you are, you've ventured back home, and the policemen have said, hey, you're not allowed to go to your property, it's way too dangerous. Let's launch that poll, Jim, that asks our attendees, what would they really be doing on an average Wednesday in summer? Okay. And don't forget, we can't see your answers. We can't see who's answering what. Have a go and tell us what you think. It'll give us some idea of your level of preparation. So let's launch that poll about planning and decision making. The first question is, where would you be on your average Wednesday in summer? Are you likely to be at home or work or on holiday? Importantly, thinking of question 2, thinking about last summer, would you have been prepared to spend a few nights away from your home in an emergency situation like this? And finally, question 3, did you have an emergency kit packed, containing all the vital things? And Jim will talk about a typical emergency pack very shortly. Yeah, this gives us some idea of your level of preparation or preparedness. As an ex-Cub Scout, one thing that we all were always told, our motto was be prepared. Worst case scenario, always be prepared. Have your essentials. Look, you knew that it was an extreme day, hot, windy, and yet you decided to go into town, into work. How prepared were you? So everyone's answered that poll. So let's share the results, Jim. What are the results telling us, Jim?
Half of the people are at home, the other half are at work. 70% of people think about last summer, would they have been prepared to spend a few nights away? And most people said that they would have been, which is good.
Excellent.
And did they have an emergency kit packed and ready to go? Most people said no. So there's an area of opportunity for people.
Absolutely.
Thinking about a emergency pack with all the basic essentials that could be contained therein.
Absolutely. Well, let's just talk about the emergency bag while we're on that topic, Jim.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so the types of things you'd want to include in an emergency pack, you've got to think that you could be away for a day or so. You'd want, of course, your medications and prescriptions. Mobile phone's a good way to keep in touch with family members because they'll probably be worried about you, and of course the charger. You'd want, some water, maybe some snack food. You just never know. You might be stuck somewhere. Other things you would include would be your ID. Now, if a fire breaks out and you need to get back in, the policeman might not allow you to get back in until you can present ID. You need to think about your pets. You might have a dog and a cat. You need to think about having maybe a radio, a change of clothes. All of these things, that can be pre-packed into a bag ready to go. And likewise with your kids, give them a little pillowcase to fill. And then everybody's prepared, they're ready to go. Otherwise they'll take the whole bedroom. So think ahead, and then you're prepared, and then the emergency arises, you can deal with it with a lot less stress, because it'll be a stressful day as well.
Oh, thanks for that, Jim. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to take you through to the next part of this scenario. It is the same day, except this time when you jump on the big emergency app, you see that there is a fire. It's still a while away. And you know this because the little yellow shaded area on your phone doesn't quite reach your house. So you think to yourself, I've got enough time to run home and grab some important stuff. So you drive home. As you get out of the car in your driveway, you can smell smoke. Great, you're using your senses. It's still really windy and hot, typical of an extreme day. We know that from our FDR and also the Vic Emergency app. You check the app again and you see the little yellow triangle on your screen. It's still an advice message. You should have enough time. You frantically move around the house, grabbing your important things and start running them out to the car. Every now and then you check on your phone to see if you've been told to evacuate, but still nothing. So you think to yourself, you've got more time, right? You're running through a list in your head. Pets, check. Photos, check. Birth certificate, check. And the checklist is actually taking a lot longer than you thought it would. Then you notice little patches of smoke coming up from the garden bed and in that pile of leaves that you've been meaning to rake up. Embers have started falling near your home. You feel that surge of adrenaline pump through your body. You're out of time. I'd like to open up the chat function now and ask you the one question. The all-important one question is, what is the one thing that you could have done differently to avoid this situation? And what are you going to do now? Where are you going to go? Can you still drive out of your street? Is there somewhere safe that you can go to? Or do you stay at home? Do you grab that garden hose and try and put out those small fires? These are all decisions you have to make, and that is without taking into consideration other people, your family, the children, Jonathan at footy training, Alison down at the netball practice. Are they at school? Who are they with? Do you have someone who depends on you, like neighbour? Maybe it's Auntie Gladys who's confined to a wheelchair and lives alone 2 doors down from you. Do you have horses? Have they been moved out of the area? What if a tree has come down and the wind is now blocking your exit route? This probably feels like a lot to take in right now. Like I'm bombarding you with questions you may not have an answer for or haven't considered, right? And that is without the stress of there being an actual fire happening. So can we see the amount of personal stress and burden that we're placing upon ourselves? I'm just going to look at some of the responses that we've had in our chat. And clearly everyone is 100%. Leaving early, having an emergency bag ready to grab. Thanks, Julie. Being more prepared with an emergency kit, Joanne, spot on. These are all great answers. Marianne, fantastic. Be ready by having the stuff in the car so you don't have to go back. See, this is all about preparation, and some of the ideas that we've tried to portray this evening is to plant that seed of preparation amongst everyone that's attending so that you can then spread the word amongst the community that preparation is the key. Thanks everyone for answering that poll. Let's move on. Preparedness is the key. We've clearly seen that, and you've clearly exemplified that in your responses, making a plan before the summer starts. I know that we've done a lot of community fire group planning with Kathy's help in Peterborough. So this should be front and center of all community members in Peterborough. We know that you live a very vulnerable part of the state. And this is all the more reason to have that plan in place, a written plan that all members of the family and the community are aware of. Use and be conversant with the Vic Emergency app to stay informed, understand fire activity in your area. And there is a bushfire planning workshop planned for your area. Bad fire days will come. There's no chance of them not happening. So we know when we talk about risk management and risk mitigation to be out of harm's way. If we know something's going to be happening, let's have a plan to put into place for when it happens. A few notes about COVID-19 before we move on to the final stage of this evening's presentation, and thank you for your ongoing attendance. During COVID-19 restrictions, you may travel if you are doing so as part of your bushfire plan. If you're in quarantine or isolation due to coronavirus, you can leave your home if you are in an emergency or your home is unsafe. But try to get back into self-isolation as soon as you safely can. If you're feeling unwell or have symptoms, isolate yourself from others. Ensure you always wear a mask or a face covering and get tested as soon as possible. And yes, you can still leave early. One of the big things about having the best laid plans is they can sometimes fail. Now, should this be the situation, Jim's going to take you through some survival options if your plan fails. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. So, like Raj said, sometimes the best plans come unstuck, don't they? And now the decisions we have to make are life-saving decisions, crucial decisions. And as you could see, you know, earlier from the comments from the people that have been through bushfires, it's quite traumatic. So the information we're going to present could be confronting to some people, but now you're at the last resort, and you know it's crucial decisions now need to be made. So the first thing we need to do is think about how we're going to present ourselves to a fire. Now you look at the way that the CFA dress, they're well covered up. You see some people on the news in bushfires, and they're out there with the garden hose in thongs and t-shirt and shorts. Nothing could be worse. You need an outfit like you see here on this this model here. A hat, eye protection. As you learnt earlier, the embers could be blowing towards your face, and the last thing you need to happen to you is to be blinded by embers and dust and dirt. Mask so you don't breathe it in. You need natural fibre clothing, cotton or wool. Any synthetics will just melt under the heat, potentially. Tough leather gloves and sturdy boots with natural fabric socks. So that's the way you need to present yourself if you're at the last resort and you're caught out, unfortunately. But it'll give you the maximum protection against radiant heat and ember attacks that could be flowing towards you. Moving on to the next slide now, radiant heat. We learnt earlier with radiant heat can't go through solid objects such as a brick wall or sheltering behind a house or a water tank. Somewhere there's a solid object. Radiant heat will be the killer. However, just be aware that radiant heat will pass through glass, so you wouldn't want to be standing in front of a window or be exposed to glass at that stage. Once the radiant heat has passed, the object might catch on fire, but you know some of the danger is eliminated by taking coverage behind a solid object while the radiant heat is at its fiercest. So that could be one range of possible scenarios. However, there's others as well. And Raj is going to talk through some of the other scenarios you might be in as well. Thanks, Raj.
Thanks, Jim. So when we're in a situation like this, it can be difficult, but we have to stay composed and go to a place with less fuel load, fewer trees, shorter grass. Look for an open space, You could even go to an open paddock or a school oval where the fuel is lower and the grass is shorter. You may even move to a large water source like a river or a large dam. And of course, we've got the sea near Peterborough also. Do not drive through fire. Heavy smoke will make it impossible to see and be extremely disorientating. There's a high risk that you might hit a tree or hit other vehicles, be involved in an accident. You may well actually block access to emergency services. So you may well be actually more of a hindrance than an aid. Sheltering in a car from fire is an incredibly risky thing to do. Cars are designed to transport you from A to B, not to protect you from fire. But also understand that the CFA do acknowledge that it might be an option in the event of being caught out. If this is the case, you can actually place yourself within the motor vehicle. First of all, try and park the motor vehicle or car onto unburnt or burnt ground of short fuel load, away from a road, with lights on, preferably facing the advancing fire front so that you've got the engine block between you and the fire. Obtain a woolen blanket, a bottle of water. With the dry woolen blanket, lower yourself into the footwell below the level of the window line and cover yourself with the blanket. Do not wet the blanket because that will scald you once it gets hot. Keep it dry, maintain hydration, stay properly hydrated at all times, and monitor the fire activity. It's not something that the CFA advocate, but it might be a last resort option. When we talk about last resort options, we also have the bushfire places of last resort. And I'm sure that you will be familiar with the one that's in Peterborough, located at the Monument Car Park on Irving Road. Now, the bushfire place of last resort is denoted by the green sign that you see there. This area doesn't actually guarantee safety or be a comfortable experience. Don't expect a cup of cocoa in your slippers or anything like that. It offers a chance for you to be some distance from the advancing fire and the radiant heat. The other nearest bushfire place of last resort is in Port Campbell on the foreshore and Cairns Street. And thereafter, the next available one will be the Timboon at Timboon and District Hall at 53 Bailey Street. But of course, both Port Campbell and Timboon would require for you to drive. And again, we are then adding more risk to the process. Do you really want to risk driving in a fire environment after everything that we know about fire and fire behavior? I think not. And that's why it's so very important to take action. Take action and make that plan. One thing that will happen, as Jim mentioned earlier, is at the end of this presentation, when you close out, you'll be taken to a resources tab where you will have the ability to, or the opportunity to download a very succinct guide to survival, as well as a guide to property preparation. These could be real lifesavers when it comes to repairing your plan and staying safe during the pending fire season. Write down that plan and prepare your property. Sit down with community members, with family, with vulnerable members of the community. We are planning a bushfire planning workshop for Peterborough, so watch this space, and I will be in touch with Kathy Marsh to make that happen. The all-important Vic Emergency app, connect with your local brigade and community. And I've got details of Stephen here, Stephen Beaton, your Peterborough Brigade captain, and his mobile phone number. If anyone listening this evening has any queries or questions regarding fire safety, fire behaviour, and there's some very interesting comments that have come up in our chat function regarding options in the event of fire. Our number one thing is really to say, have that plan, know what you're up against, and leave early. It'll be something that the brigade will be most grateful for because it reduces liability for them. It makes their job easier. It makes it possible for them to care for the community more effectively, knowing that the majority have now left and only a few remain, perhaps. What I'd like to do now, before we sign off finally with our presentation, is launch our final poll. Jim, would you like to launch our final poll, please?
All right. That launch, Raj?
While you're doing that, I will just respond to Marianne Berg, who's asked why not the foreshore in Peterborough. Interestingly, all the bushfire places of last resort have a certain criteria that they have to fulfill before they can be acknowledged as a bushfire place of last resort. I believe the foreshore in Peterborough doesn't meet the strict CFA criteria to be designated a bushfire place of last resort. Sorry, Jim? So I'm just launching our final poll. Just 2 questions to give us some feedback about this presentation. So for the 6 remaining applicants or attendees, if you could give your feedback to question 1, did you find this meeting gave you a better understanding of bushfire in your local area? And question 2, would you recommend this program to family, friends or neighbours that live in a fire-prone area? Fantastic. Thank you so very much. I'll end that poll now. I'm glad in many ways, both for Jim and myself, that we've been able to share some information with you that could potentially be a game changer in your safety against fire. Now, we also acknowledge that some of the information contained in this presentation may have been emotionally impactful on some. If this is the case, we'd like to share the contact details of Beyond Blue and also Lifeline as some services that may be approached to provide support. We thank you for your time this evening. Jim, is there anything you want to add as we close the presentation this evening?
I'm not sure there are any.
I'd like to thank for everyone that joined us from Peterborough. If I'm going to close the presentation now, I'd thank you for your time and taking time out. And Kathy, I will be in touch to talk more about the bushfire planning workshops as we move forward. Thank you, Peterborough, for attending this Fire Safety Essentials. Stay safe. Goodbye for now.